Well, let me start off with my experience. So, back in 2019, when I was doing my master's at Calcutta, I stayed in the hostel, which was inside the university itself. My room was a decent one. Let me tell you how we had our accommodations in the hostel. Every room had 2 compartments in it, where 2 people could share a single room. So, without further ado, let me directly come to the experience. So, it goes like this. One night, me and my roomie prepared to sleep as usual after dinner, and we had turned off the light and got into our beds. We bid each other goodnight and went off to sleep. After a few hours, I was a little disturbed in my sleep because it felt like something was licking my lips. I opened my eyes a little to see what it was. To my horror, here comes the scary part of it, there was a black shadow-like figure that was sitting on the floor beside my bed and was licking my face. I was too horrified at this. I froze, and I couldn't move my hands or feet. I was there, laying motionless on the bed, watching the strange figure right there beside me. Then I saw it get up and run towards the wall and disappeared in a split second. I was so shaken by this that I just froze there, unable to move in horror. I looked at my roomie. She was fast asleep, and I didn't want to wake her up. Then, slowly, I got up and sat on my bed, imagining for a while what could have possibly happened. Then I drank some water, and went towards the shelf and took the small idol of Lord Ganesha, Hindu god worshipped in India, and clutched it tight in my hands, prayed to God, and kept the idol under my pillow and went back to sleep. I haven't really shared this experience with anyone, and whenever I think of it, it gives me the chills to this very day. Was it sleep paralysis? Or something paranormal? I don't know. All I know is, whatever it was, it's a complete mystery. Hi, my name is Purana from India, and this is a real scary story of my life. This happened to me on the 13th of August, 2020. Don't think this is a lie. What I am saying is true. This is a real story of my life. During the pandemic, while the lockdown was all over the world, I was super bored at home. I was getting lazy. I didn't know what to do because I have no siblings and my cousin's house was far. I watched a lot of horror things on my tablet and really enjoyed them, but especially the Ouija board videos. It's super creepy and cool, and I was thinking I should try it. I told my dad I need it, but he just said, "No, dear, because this is so creepy, and this is a total lie, and this is also expensive," which was a real bummer because I really wanted a Ouija board. But then I got an idea. A lot of things, like games, show up in the Play Store, so maybe I can find a Ouija board app there. I first searched in mobile, but the screen is so small. Then I decided to download the app on my tablet because that has a bigger screen, right? So I downloaded it and opened the Ouija board app. I was so excited to start playing with it. There were a lot of instructions about how to talk to the spirits respectfully. For example, the instructions said to ask, "What is your name? Where are you from? How old are you?" Things like that. So, okay, that seemed easy enough. I started to play and asked the questions that the instructions said to ask, but I was so curious. So I asked, "Will you kill me?" Suddenly, the screen was covered in blood, and I was so scared that I said goodbye quickly. Looking at the reviews, I saw one of them that said, "I was playing this game, then I said goodbye immediately. I went to sleep and got up at 1:18 a.m., and I saw a figure in front of my window. I was so scared. I pretended like I was sleeping, and the figure went away. I was so scared, hoping it wouldn't happen to me, but I thought I was different." That night, I was sleeping in my bed with my mom, while my dad slept in another room to work on his computer for office work. I slept well, but woke up in the middle of the night. I looked at a clock, and it said 1:27 a.m. I thought I was safe for a moment, that I'd slept through the time the review said, and then I saw it. The review said they saw one figure, but I saw three girls. One was a small girl holding a doll, and another girl had nothing in her hand, and they were watching me. They were so scary, with big wide eyes, standing in front of the door. It was locked, and I tried to wake my mom up by shaking her. I couldn't get any words out. When my mom opened her eyes, I tried to show her the figures, but they were gone. How? My mom asked in our native language, "What happened, Tobu? Why did you wake me up?" I said, "Nothing, Mom. I just saw a cockroach, and it is gone, so don't worry. Go back to sleep, Mom." She was confused at first, but went back to sleep. I barely slept all night, and when I got up in the morning, I deleted that Ouija board app and went to brush my teeth. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a massive scratch on my face. Only one scratch. I don't play horror games with my relatives or others now.
I'm 25 years old now, and the experiences I'm about to share took place when I was 5 to 6 years old. At that time, me and my family were in a different state. My father worked at a local factory, and we used to live in company quarters. It was a small apartment, had a living room, one bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom. I don't remember much of my childhood there, but this thing I vividly remember. I still don't know if it was a sleep paralysis or a nightmare. I would frequently see some people during nighttime. This only happened a dozen times if I remember correctly. I sleep with my parents. As I told earlier, we had only one bedroom. These people would just walk around or perhaps just look at me. They don't intend it to harm me or frighten me. Whenever I see them, I can't speak and I couldn't get up, but I could turn my head and move my arm. The next thing I'm about to tell you is a bit hilarious. The only thing they did to me is tickle me. Yeah, I know I might be crazy, but that's the truth. Whenever I woke up at night, I just see them there, either just walk around the room or just look at me, or sometime even give little tickles. They were dark-toned and I don't remember seeing their faces, but I remember that their skin was rough and thorny, much like a croc skin. Now, I'm about to tell the experience I remember the most. As usual, I woke up in middle of the night. Mom and Dad were fast asleep. I sleep in between them as we had only one bed. And there they are in the kitchen, which is attached to the bedroom. We had a gas stove. And there were two of those people doing something on stove, turning their backs on me. As usual, can't make a sound, but I can move my arm. First, I tried to call Mom by poking with my hand. As I was about to do that, somehow one of them sensed it and turned and looked at me. I froze, didn't move a muscle. After he turned and returned to whatever he was doing, I decided to poke my father. As anticipated, when I was about to do that, the same guy sensed it again and just looked at me. Perhaps he was to warn me. Then everything went black. This was one of the few experiences I remember. But I'm sure they didn't harm me in any way, but they tickled me, which I disliked. I don't think I told my parents about them. Eventually, I also called them a name. I don't know when, how, or why I came up with such a name. I clearly remember the name though. I'm not saying that here. It's in native language and actually is a childish name and embarrassed to say it here. But the name is more synonymous to false god or false holiness. One other thing I remember is whenever I see them, I was not overly fearful or panicked. On the other hand, I was desperate to make them leave as I hated those tickles. After my 6th birthday, my father got transferred to a different place and we moved to another state and I didn't see them again. As I grew up, I came to know about sleep paralysis and lucid dreaming and accepted those as possible explanations. But something still fishy, as I described their bodies and feet. For a 5-year-old to imagine things with such details is impossible. Those scaly, thorny exteriors and the sequences that occurred can't just come from a 5-year-old's imagination. Well, I leave it for you to decide what it was. By the way, I'm still very ticklish to this day. Hypersensitive to tickles, actually.
My name is Alex, and at the time of me writing this incident occurred 1 week ago. For the past couple of months, I've been learning German because I thought it would be fun to learn another language. Never would I have expected it to save my life. I live in Maryland, and in my county, I attend school in person instead of virtually. Ever since I started going to high school, I've decided I should walk home because I personally enjoy taking walks, and I figured it would help me with the stress of high school. So like any other day, I started my walk home after school. I had my earbuds in, and I was walking home mostly looking at the surrounding trees and the passing cars. Around 15 minutes into my walk home, I heard two voices behind me. From what I heard, it sounded like two middle-aged men. I didn't think much of it, but I took out my earbuds just in case they tried to talk to me so I could hear them. I noticed they were talking in German. Being nosy and wanting to put my German to the test, I focused on them talking to each other. I started to feel worried because I kept hearing them saying, "the boy in front." The sound of passing cars didn't let me hear them entirely, but I did hear them say one sentence that made my heart drop to my stomach. One of the men said, "We need to get him quick before he gets away." Because I heard this, I glanced back, only for a second, and I saw the two men potentially about to kidnap me. One was a tall white man, and the other was an average-height white man. They were both dressed in all black with their hoods up, and also wearing black face masks too. When I looked at them, they immediately looked at me, their eyes piercing through mine. I pretended like I didn't suspect them of anything at all, even though I knew exactly what they were planning. I started to pick up my pace gradually, and apparently so did they, because I could hear two pairs of footsteps slowly getting louder. Next, I did something I can only describe as stupid. I stopped and turned toward them, facing them directly, and they abruptly stopped as well. I had a good look at them now. They both had their face masks all the way down, and they both had a smile stretched from cheek to cheek. The most creepy thing about the two was the fact that even though they were smiling, their eyes still burned right through mine. It was honestly something you would see in your nightmares. I stood as still as a statue until I heard the tall one shout in German, "Grab him now!" I immediately started bolting down the sidewalk, trying my best not to look back. However, the urge to look back was very strong. The moment I looked back, I saw the shorter one basically inches away from my face, extending his arms out, trying to grab me. That only gave me more adrenaline, and I started to run, not stopping to take a breath until I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. When I felt safe, I looked back and I saw the tall one making an angry gesture, while the other one, instead of doing something more predictable, let out a blood-curdling scream, almost animal-like. That one really scared me, and I don't think I'll forget that one for the rest of my life. I watched them both run the opposite direction. I didn't feel safe going back home until I saw that they were out of sight. When they eventually got out of sight, I ran some more until I got back home. I immediately went upstairs because I would feel useless mentioning this to my parents because number one, they were dressed in all black. Number two, I'd failed to get a good picture of the two in my head, despite seeing their faces for so long. Not to mention, I was also scared that somehow they might have found me. I sure as hell won't ever walk back home again. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment I turned around, only to see their horrifying eyes looking through me. Another thought that haunts me is, what would have happened if I didn't understand German?
We're going back at least 10 years for this one, but it's something I still think about almost every dang day. It was the holiday season, incredibly cold out, and I was walking down the 40th Street, Lowry Street subway station near Queens Boulevard. I can't remember exactly where I was going at the time. I think I was on my way home from work, but I'm not sure if I actually worked a shift or if I just stopped by to pick up in advance, but either way, I'm basically in a world of my own, mulling over my financial troubles as I push through the ticket barrier and find a place to sit. Then, some person gets my attention, but only in that New York way where you don't ever look directly at the thing, you just observe it carefully out of your peripheral vision. This young-looking Latina lady, wearing a blue, white, and gray jacket, was pacing up and down the platform and, muttering to herself. It sounds cynical, I know, but when you grow up in NYC, you learn to live with stuff like that. You learn to just shrug it off and say, "It's none of my business," before moving on. But sometimes you don't get to just look away and pretend it isn't happening, because that craziness, those damaged people, they make it your business. So like I said, the Hispanic girl is walking up and down, occasionally sitting down and then getting up again all erratically, and all the while, all the other passengers are just pretending like it's not happening. And then we hear the telltale sign of a train coming down the tunnel. So, just like usual, all the people taking it gradually stand up and make their way towards the edge of the platform. I remember seeing this one dude. He was some older-looking guy, and he's just minding his own business, waiting for the train to roll up. Then, out of nowhere, the girl basically runs up behind the guy and shoves him onto the tracks. The sound the crowd made is something that'll definitely stick with me for the rest of my life. You don't forget real terror like that when you hear it. But the messed up thing is, although they were screaming, no one actually did anything to help. I even remember seeing this flashing light and realizing that some dude was literally just standing there, taking pictures of the guy lying on the tracks as the train got louder and louder, and it got closer and closer. And then, as the screams reached this unbearable peak of horror, the train just rolled over the dude. I remember looking around and seeing the girl that had pushed him bolting up the stairs, trying to get as far away from the scene as she could. People were still screaming, only now some were crying while others followed the pusher up the stairs to either chase her or rushing the payphones to call 911. It all happened so fast I realized that all I'd done is just stand there, open-mouthed, just horrified by the whole thing. And for the longest time I kicked myself for not trying to help the guy. But more than one person has informed me that if I had jumped down to try to help the dude, I probably wouldn't be around to write this. I know the pusher was caught, as I followed the story for a while after, but I can't remember if they were charged with murder or just ended up getting locked up in Bellevue or something, because as sure as eggs is eggs, that girl was Ubats. Taking the subway got real stressful for a long time after, but thankfully, a lot of people were just as scared as I was, and I didn't have to suffer through the anxiety of watching people go too near the edge. They made sure not to all their own. Time went by and hysteria about subway pushers kind of faded, but every so often it still happens. In fact, it happened again just last month. Again, it was a woman from Queens that was arrested. Apparently, she never spoke to the guy she pushed, just picked someone at random and almost killed the guy. Hearing about other pushers just brings all that fear right back to me. One minute you're standing there minding your own business, just waiting for the frickin' subway, and the next, there's nothing. Life can end that suddenly, all because some psycho decided you had to die. Some psycho you never met before in your life. And the fact that people out there exist, and there are a lot of them, that's the thing that scares me the most in the world, and why I never get up for a train before it comes to a complete stop. Since mid-July of 2021, China's Henan province had been affected by a prolonged period of heavy rainfall. In just 1 hour alone, weather stations in the provincial capital of Zhengzhou observed a maximum rainfall of 20 centimeters. And that might not sound like too much, but consider the fact that just 20 centimeters caused a horrifying 302 deaths. The flooding has affected a whopping 9.3 million people, and with over 800,000 of them requiring emergency evacuation. Naturally, there are hundreds of thousands of tragic and terrifying stories that have come out of Henan in the past few months, but arguably none quite as horrifying as those that emerged from the floods of July 20th. Zhengzhou is located in a semi-arid region far from China's coast, a place where the annual rainfall averages just 60 centimeters. But on July 20th alone, 67 centimeters of rain was dumped on the city's unsuspecting populace, with the water pooling in low-lying areas and flooding many of the city's streets. Zhengzhou University's chief hydrologist Hu Kaiheng stated the city's drainage system was built to withstand what's known as a 100-year flood, so named so because they only occurred every 100 years. Zhengzhou's metro system, on the other hand, its subterranean location making it very susceptible to the flooding, was built to withstand a 200-year flood, with its entrances built on raised platforms to negate the effects of the heavy summer rains. Yet, Hu later stated that the Zhengzhou that day was more like a 1,000-year flood, and unbeknownst to the subway system's operators, water had begun to collect in a metro yard in a low-lying area of the city. Around 6 p.m. that evening, commuters traveling to the Zhengzhou subway system were well aware of the heavy rain that had been falling, but had already been assured that the system was essentially flood-proof. Yet when all the system's trains suddenly ground to a halt, most of which did so in the network of tunnels, its passengers began to suspect that the system wasn't as flood-proof as they'd been told. Some believed it was simply a temporary fault on the line, and that the trains would resume service in due course. But after an extended period of time went by, the passengers began to grow concerned. By 6:10 p.m., just over 500 passengers were trapped underground. 500 passengers who noticed that water had begun to pool on the tracks outside their windows. They must have known that the suspension of service was connected to some kind of leak, but none could have expected how dire the situation was about to get, or the horror that would unfold as a result. Slowly but surely, over the course of the next hour or so, the water levels outside the subway trains grew higher and higher. Cell phone videos of the incident illustrate the elevating levels of concern as anxious humming grows into a crescendo of terrified cries when the waterline reaches the windows of the train's sliding doors. By that point, water had begun to leak into the train carriages themselves, and terrified passengers found themselves having to stand on the seats in order to avoid the still rising waters. By the point that it became too hard to breathe in the train carriages, the passengers knew they had to fight for their lives, and they began to break out of the trains and swim for safety. Many described the terror that they felt as they swam harder and faster than ever before, dreading the moment the water line slipped over their heads and only a lungful of oxygen would separate them from a painful death by drowning. We can only imagine their relief as they emerged at the metro system's various stations, wading their way through waist and chest-high waters as the sheer scale of the disaster became evident to them. Elsewhere in the central Chinese city, almost 100 children had to be rescued from a flooded nursery school, with Chinese state media airing footage of them being floated out in plastic tubs given to them by rescue workers. The first affiliated hospital of Zhengzhou also briefly lost power at one point, which naturally made dealing with the flood casualties extremely difficult. However, Chinese authorities were quick to add that power was restored to the hospital within just a few hours, and that the blackout didn't contribute to any of the deaths that day. The floods were such a catastrophe that an entire battalion of the Chinese People's Liberation Army was mobilized after a 20-meter breach emerged from the Luoyang city dam. PLA High Command was apparently told that the dam could collapse at any time, and if it had, it's estimated that the breach would cause tens of thousands of flood-related deaths. Thankfully, the dam held, but for a while, Chinese social media was aflame with horrifying statuses posted by terrified flood victims. "We don't know how to swim. The whole village is about to be washed away," one person wrote, as the ruination of entire families was documented. each in less than 140 characters. Out of the 500 passengers that were trapped underground that evening, it seems a miracle that only 12 people lost their lives. But those are 12 poor souls who still should be with us today. And although we can argue back and forth on the cause of such dramatic rainfall, questions must be asked when the integrity of the city's public transport system fails so spectacularly and with such fatal results. We can only hope that the lessons of the Zhengzhou subway floods will be learned, and in 1,000 years, when the next apocalyptic rainstorm comes around, we'll be much more prepared to deal with it.
This happened when I was 13 years old. I lived in India with my parents and my grandparents in a very old house which was nearly 100 years old. My aunt and my uncle used to visit me to that house. We have CCTV footage in our house as the area is a little dangerous. The house has a terrace, which is from the first floor where my aunt and uncle stayed. Anyways, one day when I came home from walking my 11-year-old Labrador, I saw that everybody in the house were arguing and yelling. I ignored it and went to see my friends. The next day, I was surprised when I saw the same fight continuing when I returned from meeting my girlfriend. I thought it was a reoccurring fight, so I ignored it too, and I went and did my homework. The next day when I woke up, I had the most chilling part of my life. My dog was dead, and a guy was beaten to death by someone inside our house. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't as the scene was very horrifying. The head was smashed and the blood was in a pool. I woke up my parents and I yelled on top of my lungs. My dad called 100, which is the police number in India. The police came at 5 minutes, and they took the body in the ambulance which came with the police car. One cop began to ask questions to us, and they found no weapon or tool lying nearby. The most chilling part is that the police found nobody in the CCTV footage coming and going outside of our home. A guy jumped into our corridor and my dog barked at him. He stabbed the dog with a dagger, and when he went near our gate, he was pushed by someone who was not there in the camera, and he was beaten to death. He was moving as if someone was beating him. Then he passed away. My parents and I went to a Shiva temple near our house in our car, and we saw the priest. The priest came to our house and performed some mantras and looked at us and said, "She is very angry. She is guarding you." We looked at the priest confused. Then what he said was very chilling. Turns out a 15-year-old girl was staying in our house before it was sold to us, and she was brutally raped by the guy who got beaten. I was shocked from that instant. We moved out of the house. We never went to the house again.
My older brother dated a ghost for 2 years. He still doesn't know this. Rather, he is still in denial of the fact that he dated a ghost. He went to see a Buddhist monk and a shaman, was exorcised and went to a mental hospital. It took him 2 years to get the ghost off of him with all that happening. He could finally break up with her after that. But he couldn't accept the breakup and hurt himself out of rage, resulting in his admission to a psychiatric ward. He is still looking for her, but she can never come back, as she was sent to another world. The memory goes back 2 years ago. My brother was an ordinary man and he was popular among women with his good looks. He had good grades at school and was athletic and sociable. He was a good guy that anyone would like. Until that incident happened. My brother had an ordinary life, dating girls of his age like others. But all that changed one day. Our family went through a huge crisis due to our dad's business failing. We moved to another house after packing everything up. The new home was very spacious and seemed too great for its low price. There was one odd thing. The day before my dad signed the contract for the house, my dad's mom, that is my grandmother, had a dream, a terrifying dream. In the dream, Grandma followed us when we were entering the house. And once she entered, all of the family was weeping and staring at her. The scene was very spooky to her, so Grandma called Dad right away. But we didn't have another choice as there was no house available at a lower price than this, so we decided to move into the house. We thought nothing terrible could happen and considered Grandma's dream just a silly dream. That was when it started. After a week since we moved in, my brother began to act weird. He started to talk to himself in his room. I first thought he was on the phone with his new girlfriend. He was talking in such a sweet and soft voice, just like talking to a girlfriend. Every time I ran into him in the living room, he looked delighted with cheeks flushed with joy. I thought to myself, he must have started dating. Good for him. But one day, that shocking thing happened. I went into my brother's room to ask him to go exercise with me. He was talking to someone in a gentle voice, but wasn't on the phone. He was talking with his hands posed as if he was hugging an invisible person. I was so shocked and shouted to ask what was he doing. He replied, Oh, you've never met my girlfriend before. Say hi. This is Mia. I told him to stop messing around. To my surprise, his hands were posed as if he was really hugging someone, and his natural pose really made me feel like there was someone there, and there were his nonchalant face and tone. My brother continued, Why are you ignoring Mia? Aren't you going to say hello back? I really felt like someone else than my brother was staring at me, and even though it didn't make any sense, it felt so real that I almost thought I was the weird one. Confused, I ended up running out of the room. I thought I should let my parents know of this incident as soon as possible, and I did tell them everything. They didn't believe me at first, but they also witnessed the scene not too long after. They were also shocked by my brother's actions. Dad lost his temper and yelled at my brother at first, but my brother wouldn't listen. My mom tried to persuade him and tried to talk to him, but communication itself was impossible. My brother was already out of his mind. After that, we have invited shamans, monks, and priests known for their powers, but all of them would just say that my brother is possessed and none of their exorcism would work. We went to several mental hospitals and psychiatrics to no avail. Strangely, my brother lost weight day by day. 3 months later, he was only left with bones like a corpse, but he still had a happy look on his face. He would always say with an empty gaze, I'm happy, so happy. Made me feel like I'd go crazy. He kissed and hugged the empty air. I witnessed that craziness with my own eyes. During that time, my brother lost more than 30 pounds of weight. I thought my brother would end up dying like this. My mom became ill in bed from the shock. It felt like the entire family would be falling apart at this rate. Finally, Dad suggested that we move to a different house. We decided to move into a tiny house. We couldn't help it because we didn't have money. The new house was so tiny that our family wouldn't have any personal space, but it was more important to save my brother's life. So we ended up moving to a new house as soon as we could. Then my brother started to lose his mind. Where's Mia? Mia's gone. In his madness, he started to throw everything around him. He destroyed the entire house. He stopped eating, and the situation grew worse. One fortunate thing was that he isn't dating a ghost anymore. It seemed like he was slowly coming to his senses. But the thing is, he was suffering even more from love sickness. In the end, we forced him into a psychiatric ward. My brother finally started to calm down with medical help, and our family found peace again. My brother still doesn't know or understand that he dated a ghost. He still asks me if I heard from Mia. I tell him no every time. How can a ghost reach out to me? But to this day, I sometimes hear a knocking sound in the middle of the night. I would wake up by the sound, terrified. Of course, there was no one there, but I think it might be Mia looking for my brother.
This incident is what my friend went through in person about a month ago. A body was found in my friend's car out of nowhere. One day in July, he was parking his car near his house after work. He accidentally forgot to lock the door and got off as it was. And the next day, he headed back to the car to drive and saw a man sitting in the back seat before opening the car door. Surprised, he tried to wake the man up, but there was no answer from him. Was that a drunk who slept in the wrong car? At first, he opened the car door thinking like this. However, something was weird. There was a small amount of bleeding in the man's head, and the color of his entire body was already changed. In addition, there were purple spots on his skin everywhere, a symptom caused by blood clotting. Being frustrated, he immediately called 911 with his hands trembling. The operator asked him to confirm the body, saying that the process of dispatch varies depending on whether the person is alive or dead. He shouted, almost in tears, and appealed to come quickly, that it's a real body. The police and CSI were also dispatched, and then they all found something strange. I mean, it was literally an odd situation. Why on earth did the utter stranger suddenly die in the back of another's car? At first, my friend was suspected and almost summoned to the police station for questioning. However, fortunately, there was a CCTV in the nearby store, and the analysis concluded that it was just an accident. Turns out that the place where my friend had parked his car that day was in front of a building, and there was a staircase in the building. On that day, the man stumbled as he came down the stairs after drinking heavily, lost his footing in an accident, and just fell down. And the camera recorded the man falling who had been having symptoms of mental illness. I understand it's totally absurd, but just as he rolled down, he grabbed my friend's car's back door handle, opened it, and entered in by accident. The drunken man was knocked unconscious when he fell and crammed in the back seat just like that. Only the door was open, and as the taxi passed by his car, the taxi driver stopped and then closed the door. And that's what the camera had recorded, the whole incident. Since it was the middle of the summer at that time, the man had died from the heat wave and was found only a half a day later. If my friend had locked the car door that day, if that man hadn't lost his footing on the stairs, if he hadn't opened the car door when he fell, and if the taxi driver hadn't closed the back door, he might have survived. For some reason, this story from my friend reminded me of the movie Final Destination. I mean, don't you think it's a bizarre death? It felt really weird. Anyway, after that, my friend thought about changing the car because he felt uncomfortable to keep riding in it where the body was found, but soon decided just to ride it. However, body fluid already had come out of the body, so we had to change the sheet. My name is Lance. This story happened when I was 13. My older brother, Carl, had a group of friends that always came over to our house. Their names were Jack, George, Max, and Steven. They always liked to hang out in the living room, and usually when I was there watching TV before they came, my brother urged me to go to my room, which annoyed me a lot. I always liked snooping around my brother's room, since he had a lot of cool things in there. He'd always catch me later on and yell at me to get out of his room. One day I noticed that one of his friends, George, stopped coming over. I asked Carl about it, but he said they weren't friends anymore. I believed him and forgot about the situation. Then I started to realize that my brother was spending a lot of time upstairs in his room and told me not to enter his room at all. He sounded really serious, so I stopped snooping around in his room. His room began to smell really badly, and I asked him what that disgusting smell was. He nervously said that it was some of his gym clothes, and for some reason, I believed him. One day my parents had gone out, and it was just me and my brother that were home. I was in my room playing on my PlayStation when my brother walked in and asked me if I wanted some pizza for dinner. I immediately said yes, because it's pizza. It's my favorite food. He nodded and then told me he was heading off to the pizza place. Before he closed the front door, he told me, "Please don't go in my room," and left. A few minutes passed and I got bored playing on my PlayStation, so I began snooping around in my brother's room. I know, I completely ignored my brother's rule, but I'm that annoying little brother that makes you want to just smack me. I started going through his drawers but didn't find anything interesting. As I made my way near his bed, that familiar, disgusting smell began to come. I searched his bed to see where that source of the smell was. I then realized that the source was underneath his bed. I bent down and peeked underneath the bed and found a human-sized duffel bag. I began to panic because I thought that there was a body. And as I unzipped the duffel bag, I saw my brother's friend, George, dead. The smell was coming from George's body. I screamed and ran out of the house. I ran over to my neighbor's house and begged her to let me in. I explained to her what I just saw in my house, and she called the police. The police waited for my brother to come home, and when he did, he was immediately arrested. It turns out that George had stolen $200 from my brother, and this angered my brother and caused him to beat George to death. I didn't understand. My brother was such a nice person, and I couldn't imagine him doing something like this. He was sentenced to life in prison, and I haven't seen him since.
Hi, I'm Nathan. When I was 3, we moved to a 3-bedroom house. My brother was 5. We had one of the 3 bedrooms. Mom had decorated it with our toys. We had a bunk bed. My brother got the top because I was just little. Mom noticed a black stain on the carpet, so before we slept in there, she washed the carpet. My brother slept in the room first because I was still little and sleeping in my parents' room. My brother woke terrified. Having had a terrible nightmare, he said a ghost was trying to choke him. My mom hugged him and said, "Sleep in here with us." She went to the bedroom to turn out the light that my brother had left on. She noticed the dark stain on the carpet had returned. She also felt an eerie presence in the room. She knew wasn't a person. That seemed to be warning us to stay out of this room. So she closed the door and came back to comfort my brother. The next morning, she got our toys out of that room and we didn't use the room at all. We began hearing footsteps entering and exiting the room even though the door was shut. It seemed to happen at a certain time each night about 10:30 p.m. It happened so much we jokingly laughed and said, "I think we have a ghost." One day, our friend wanted to stay in our haunted bedroom. Mom warned her that she didn't think it was a good idea, but she wanted to anyway. It was a sunny day and Mom decided to open the room and clean the dark stain to make the room ready to stay in. But the dark stain wouldn't go away like it did at first. Mom left the room open to air it out. That's when I came into the sunny, warm bedroom to play with a little toy that I had with me. My mom heard me screaming and came running to me. I was bending backwards in pain and couldn't stop screaming. The pain was so intense my mom couldn't even hold me. She immediately called my dad and we rushed off to the emergency room, which was 30 miles away. I was writhing in pain on the floorboards of our car, still screaming and in terror. As soon as we pulled into the driveway of the hospital, it was like something released its hold from me. All of a sudden, it was like nothing happened, and I was smiling and happy. I didn't remember going through any pain at all. My mom and dad were confused. I was fine. After that day, we began hearing more footsteps and we saw apparitions of my oldest brother Matt, who was 17. My dad even saw them. The apparitions appeared for a couple of seconds before they disappeared into the room with the dark stain. Once I was going into the kitchen to play on the floor. My mom was coming too. I turned my head towards the bedroom with the dark stain and looked up. I saw a figure that I thought was my oldest brother Matt. I said, "Hi, Matt." But then the figure changed into something terrifying I could not explain at the age of 3. My mom comforted me. One time I was playing chase with my 5-year-old brother Justin, and he ran into my mom and dad's room, passing the bedroom with the dark stain. I was running after him when I saw a dark figure with sharp teeth standing in front of the closed bedroom with the dark stain. I slid to a stop and it looked towards me and said, "I bite." I was terrified, so I ran to my mom and grabbed onto her in fear. She prayed with me and told my dad we should talk with the owners of the house. The next day, my mom spoke with the owners. She found out that a man by the name of Harry had terminal cancer, and his wife had been taking care of him in that room. He was said to be a very grumpy man who hated children, and how he exactly died is a mystery, because there was a pool of blood on the floor in the bedroom he died in. My mom is a believer. After she found this out, she went into the room with the dark stain. She said, "I know you must have been in a lot of pain, but you're free now, Harry. Go and be with the Lord." After that, there were no more footsteps or apparitions. There was a peace that filled our home, even though we never felt comfortable to use that room again, and we moved away a year later. My name is Daniel. I'm 17 years old and I live in South Africa. This story takes place around 2 years ago. My best friend, I don't want to mention his name for privacy, and I always get up to a lot of mischief when we're together. The trouble we cause ranges from ding-dong ditching to public vandalism. There have been a few instances where we have been chased by the police. My point is that we cause trouble and have fun doing it. When my friend and I were about 15 years old, we went to my aunt's farm in the Karoo. She stayed in her house, which was actually very nice, but my friend and I camped outside in a tent one night when we were braaiing, which is the South African version of a barbecue. My aunt told us about a house on top of a large hill which was abandoned and supposedly haunted, and she showed us where it was. My friend and I looked at each other, and we both knew what we were going to do the next day. We were going to investigate this haunted house. The next morning, him and I grabbed our backpacks and packed the essentials for an adventure: a pocket knife, a torch, warm clothes, some snacks, etc. We told my aunt that we were going to go for a bike ride, and she said, "Okay, just be safe and stay out of trouble. I don't want to hear any complaints from other people on the farm about your mischief." We assured her that we would behave. So we grabbed the bikes and our bags and off we went. It was a really hot day, so riding the bikes to the hill was exhausting. We were too tired to ride the bikes up the hill, so we left them at the bottom and walked up. Once we got to the top and had a clear view of the house, I felt nauseous and sat down for a while so I could rest. The house was very small, only 1 story tall. Eventually, I felt better and we walked to the front door of the house. To be honest, you wouldn't think it was abandoned. None of the windows were broken and it looked stable. We couldn't see inside though because the windows were boarded up from the inside of the house. We were really curious, so my friend and I did something very, very stupid. We threw rocks at the window so we could remove the boards and get inside. This hill was isolated, so we didn't think anyone would see us, and this house was also abandoned, so we also thought that no one would care. Once all the windows broke, we removed the boards by kicking and punching them down, and one by one, all the boards were down. I don't know why, but for some reason or other, we decided to break all the windows and take down all the boards instead of just one. It was probably just fun to break stuff as a dumb teenager. We crawled through one window, and since all of the boards were down and light came in, we could see everything very clearly. And the layout of the house was very simple. The living room was connected to the kitchen, and there was 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom. What we also saw confused us. All of the cupboards and drawers were filled with utensils, plates, bowls, pans, books, paintings, etc. Yet this place was supposed to be abandoned. Once again, my friend and I made a dumb decision. We started throwing rocks at the cupboards and emptied all the drawers and broke plates. What I'm saying is that basically, we completely trashed the place. In one of the drawers, we found cool board games, books, and cards and stuff. Then we went into the one and only bedroom in the house and found a picture of a family in the one drawer. There was an old man, an old woman, a young boy, and a young girl who was in a light green dress. She had very long dark brown hair. The weird thing was that the young girl wasn't near everyone else. The old man and woman and the young boy stood together and were smiling, but the girl was off to the left and far back. We thought that was weird. We also saw that something was written on the back of the picture. My friend thought it would be funny if he tore the picture into pieces. This made me uncomfortable as I thought that the picture looked like it held emotional value to whoever owned it. That was my train of thought, but I decided to keep quiet because I didn't want to be a party pooper. So I just said, "Go for it, dude," and laughed. He went on, and as he started tearing the picture, we heard faint singing coming from outside. It was the voice of a girl. My friend and I both looked at each other and were both pretty weirded out. My friend told me to go to the front window and have a look. I was freaked out, so I didn't want to, but eventually my friend forced me. I slowly went towards the window and had a look. There was in fact someone outside, and they were singing. That was already weird, but what sent shivers down my spine was that the person singing was a young girl who was wearing a green dress. She had dark brown hair exactly like the girl in the picture. How can this girl, who was around 11 years ago, be here singing in front of me when there was a picture of her from 1977? I was frozen in fear. I snapped out of it when I heard my friend whisper to me, "Dude, what's going on? What do you see?" I turned around and crawled on all fours back to my friend, trying to be as quiet as possible. I told him what I saw, and at first he didn't believe me and said, "That ain't even funny, bro." I assured him that what I was saying was true, but he remained stubborn and said, "Take a picture and I'll believe you." I asked why he didn't look for himself, and he said he didn't want to because he was also kind of freaked out. I obliged and went back to the window. I took out my phone and opened the camera. As I was about to take the photo, she stopped, slowly turned around, and let out an insanely loud scream while pointing at me. And then she jumped backwards off the hill. I dropped my phone and ran back to my friend. I felt so nauseous that I vomited. My friend was asking, "Bro, what happened? What was that scream? Why are you vomiting?" It took me a while to get a hold of myself, and I told him what I saw, and to my surprise, he believed me. We stayed in that house for a long time, too scared to go outside in case that girl was still there. We sat there silently for about 2 hours until we heard a car drive up to the house. We heard the car door open and a loud male voice yell, "We know you two are in there. Get out before we come in." It was the cops. We didn't know what to do. We worked on a plan to get out of this mess, and we said that as the cops come through the front door, we run out the back window and go around the house and make a run down the hill. So we did. The cop kicked down the front door and we hopped out the back window. We sprinted around the left side of the house and made a beeline down the hill for our bikes. Once we got our bikes, we got away quite quickly because the cops turned off their car and had to restart it. On our way back to my aunt's house, we didn't talk once. Both of us were traumatized about the whole situation. Later that day, we talked to my aunt again about the house. She admitted that what she said about the house wasn't 100% true. Her original story was just to scare us. The house wasn't abandoned, but it just wasn't being used. She said that it was a holiday house that foreigners could rent out for their visits to South Africa, but no one used that house because everyone claimed it was haunted. It was indeed an old house that people used to own from a long time ago. An elderly couple lived there from roughly 1940 to 1977. She told us that in 1977, that elderly couple had their grandchildren stay there for a weekend. There was a young boy and young girl. The young girl had a mental illness, bipolar disorder. In reports, it is said that the girl murdered everyone in that house and then committed suicide by jumping off the hill. My friend and I stayed up all night talking about that day. We both realized that the girl we saw was the girl my aunt told us about. To this day, we have never told anyone about this story.
My name is Christina, and this happened 2 years ago when I was 15. Just for you to know, it isn't really a scary story. I had a best friend named Adusa. She was from Nigeria. If you don't know, it's a country in Africa. She is very beautiful. She is caramel brown and has dark brown afro. Anyway, I wasn't that pretty. I mean, I wasn't ugly, but I had blood red hair and beautiful blue eyes, but let's just say she was top-notch, at least to every guy. Anyway, this happened when we went to hang out. A white car stopped next to us, and a guy who was about 28 years old pulled down his window. He didn't look scary. He was actually very handsome. "Where are you pretty ladies heading off to?" he asked with a flirty grin. "None of your business," Adusa said. "What's the matter, pretty girl?" he said, looking at Adusa. Of course, it was just about Adusa, I thought to myself. "And what about you, cutie?" he said, looking at me and winked. I was blushing. This was the first time a guy talked to me when Adusa was there. I was all over him at that point, but Adusa didn't really want to talk to him. But that didn't bother me. Actually, I was happy that I had him for myself. After 30 minutes of talking, he asked us if we wanted to ride with him. "Get lost, freak!" Adusa yelled, but I did want to ride with him. By the way, his car looked very expensive, so it would have been very exciting. So I told her that I wanted her to. I told her I was going to go. She tried to tell me not, but my mind was already set up. I entered the car and left Adusa behind. Everything was fine. We were just driving around, talking and laughing. It was already night, and I wanted to go home. I told him to bring me home. He nodded, so he drove and drove. After 30 minutes, I noticed he didn't even know my address, and he didn't ask for it. Where was he planning on bringing me? My naive self thought that maybe he was just going to leave me where he found me. We drove and drove until I fell asleep. I woke up by someone tying me up. I opened my eyes, and there he was, that 28-year-old guy, tying me into a chair in a basement or something like that. He noticed I was awake and started grinning. "Your friend there was really smart. You know, I would have preferred of taking her." I was confused. What are you talking about? And what are you doing?" He didn't answer, just started laughing like a mad person. What the hell did I get myself into? Not long after, there was a knocking. He stopped laughing and went up to check who was there, and then they came down with a man who was in his mid-60s. "You promised me a refugee," the man said. I was so confused. They were both talking about me and for how much the old man would buy me. I was very confused. I didn't know what I should do at that moment. Then, I heard a loud banging on the door, and then someone breaking inside the house and immediately ran towards the door and banged it open. There were cops standing there with my parents and Adusa looking all worried. Later on, Adusa told me that the phone tracker we put in each other's phones to find each other whenever we needed to know where we are, she said she used it, since I didn't answer her phone. And when she found out I was in another country, she immediately called the police. "I am in another country?" I yelled. I was so shocked. I didn't even notice we drove for so long, but I was just happy to be home, and that 28-year-old man was in jail now because he kidnapped girls and smelled them, and he did that to about 30 other girls. I am just happy that I am not one of them. He's now in prison for 8 years. I just now know that not all crazy people look crazy, and that I can't trust anyone.
This is about an awful experience I had 2 years ago. Whenever I think of the day, I get startled even while sleeping and have a terrible nightmare. Seriously, I haven't watched any TV program or movie that shows tigers since then. Now, I'm going to tell you about the day that I don't want to remember anymore. I was a college student who was always short of money and looking for a part-time job. One day, I found an interesting job. It was a job suggested by a guy who had a tiger in his house. He was going to be away for several days, and therefore, he needed a person to take care of his tiger instead of himself. As the hourly wage was as high as I could barely earn by working for 7 days, it was really irresistible to me. I was scared, but the tiger was to be locked up in the enclosure anyway, and what I was required to do was just to feed it, so I decided to do it. After calling him, I finally visited the house. He said the enclosure was at the backyard. When I reached the backyard, I saw a huge tiger. As I had never seen a tiger before in reality, I got overwhelmed with its massiveness and fear. It roared like thunder, and I became more terrified. The man said he was going to show me how to feed the tiger and brought huge chunks of meat to demonstrate. Watching a tiger chewing up the whole flesh and bones made me aghast. This time he passed me the meat and told me to try. I held the meat with a trembling hand. However, all of a sudden, he opened the door of the enclosure, pushed me into the enclosure, and closed the door. Only in the blink of an eye, I got stuck in the enclosure with the tiger. Swearing and cursing in a low voice, I said, "What the hell is he doing?" I was almost in a state of panic. I wanted to scream out, but I couldn't because I didn't want to provoke the tiger in any way. The tiger walked towards me with big strides, and I thought I was gonna die. The man looked evilly at me with a sly grin. I kept swearing and cursing at him, and it seemed like he was just enjoying watching this whole situation. He even called the tiger loudly and said, "Go bite! Eat him up! That's your food!" The tiger hovered around me like he had a great interest in me and my body. Extremely frightened, I was almost about to wet myself and couldn't even breathe. I cried and begged him to let me out, but it looked like he's really amused with this whole fucking situation, giggling. He even provoked the tiger by dangling a chunk of raw meat as if he's saying to eat me. The tiger finally came right before me and tapped me with its massive front paw. It was just a simple touch, but I felt such an incredibly formidable strength. There was nothing I could do but cry and tremble with fear, rooted to the spot. The tiger kept playing with me, and I was almost about to pass out. I felt like I was waiting to die. And then it suddenly hit me with its front paw. I tried to fend it off with my arm, and surprisingly, I got my arm broken. I heard the dreadful crunch of my arm. It was such a great shock, as if I crashed into a 1-ton truck. I felt an extremely terrible pain and started to scream. At that moment, the man opened the door with a clank, and I rushed out of there. I felt the tiger was about to swoop down on me in the back with a roar, but the man closed the door to lock him in again. When I finally got out of the enclosure, I was eager to kill him first, but I just ran away as fast as I could to escape from that hell. I heard him giggling behind me, but I just got into a car without looking back and left for home. Fortunately, I survived, but hurt my arm severely. I reported him to the police, and he got punished by law. But since then, I've suffered from awful mental trauma. If he had opened the door just 1 minute later, I would have become prey to the tiger, and wouldn't have been able to be here today. This is an unsettling story that I do not usually bring up in normal conversation, yet it's still always on my mind. It happened to me a few years ago, but I will never be able to forget this strange experience that happened in my own home. When I was a child, I was always afraid of the bathroom in my basement. Every time I walked in, I would always think that someone was hiding behind the shower curtain. I would say, "I see you," just in case someone was there, and they would be alerted. No one was there, it was all just a fear in my head. As I got older, it became a frequent habit of mine to always say, "I see you," as I walked into a room by myself. If I went to take a shower, I would say, "I see you." Come home from work, "I see you." It was all just to prepare for the slim chance that someone would be there and think that I saw them. One weekend when I was 18 years old, my parents were out of town, attending a close friend's wedding. My dad was the best man. I had the whole house to myself, and it seemed like the perfect getaway from their strict rules and occasional arguing. I didn't have friends to invite over, so I was always just alone, by myself. On the first night, things were upright. I binged my favorite horror movies, ordered food from my favorite Chinese restaurant, and just did classic teenage things that I enjoyed. I woke up the next morning for work, which at the time I was a delivery boy for a pizza place near me called the Bergen Beach Cafe. I did a lot of deliveries that night, and I remember making over $100 in tips, which at the time was huge for me. Around 8 p.m. my shift ended, and I arrived home. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw an unfamiliar car parked on the sidewalk close to my house. At first glance, I thought it was my neighbor's car, but there would be no reason for them to park in front of my house since they have a driveway of their own. Though it was strange, I brushed it off, and I walked in my house. I changed out of my work clothes and showered up into fresh pajamas. "I see you," I said, as I regularly do when I walk out of the bathroom. Something was sitting on edge with me, and the nervousness from seeing the strange car outside my house was clouding my judgment. Being alone for another full day, with my only family members out of town, was making me feel very apprehensive. But I continued on with my night. I walked downstairs and went into my kitchen to heat up my food. I get sick of eating pizza a lot of the time since I'm around it all day. So on my way home, I picked up some macaroni and cheese from the deli. 3 minutes in the microwave left me time to wait around and ponder my thoughts. I left the kitchen and walked into my living room to see what was on the television. I was a bit of a nerd and was always looking for cartoons to watch. "I see you," I said. Slowly, my heart started to drop below my waist. The moment I'd been preparing myself for my whole life had come. Something I will never forget and still haunts me to this day. From the corner of my eyes, I saw a tall, thick figure hiding behind the curtain. It started to move slightly. I was speechless. Goosebumps ran through every inch of my skin, and my brain couldn't process fast enough what to do. I swallowed deep, thinking quickly what my next move should be. The curtain moved again. I was frozen. Slowly, the curtain began to open, and a man dressed in all black was standing there. He had his head tilted to the right, staring at me with intent to murder. He had a Chelsea smile, a fresh cut with blood still dripping down, dirty skin, and his smile was wide with eyes full of rage. "I see you too," he said in a deep, raspy voice. He then pulled out a large knife from his back pocket and pointed it at me. I started to run. He immediately followed. I sped out the door with a 10-foot lead. There was no time to close the door behind me, as it would only hold me back. When I ran outside, it was pouring rain and pitch black with only the streetlights providing light. Luckily, my neighbor a few houses down across the street was a police officer, so my first instinct was to run there. I slammed on the door, knocking hard until my knuckles started to bleed. I looked back, and there he was. He stopped chasing me, but he was right there in the middle of the street, staring at me. The same smile and same crazy eyes. Suddenly, the door opened, and I rushed inside and closed the door shut with no explanation to my neighbor. I looked outside the window from his house, but I could not see any trace of the man. To this day, he could still be out there, somewhere, lurking around. Every time I think of this story, I wonder what could have happened if I never said, "I see you," whenever I walked into a room. It was the last September that I had an accident. At the time, the police told my parents that my condition was very dangerous. And my parents, of course, they ran to the hospital and almost passed out when they saw me. For your information, I was unconscious at the time of the car accident, and I still don't remember how it exactly happened. However, there was one thing I remembered. It was that I couldn't breathe at all. Do you know what it feels like to be breathless? Well, I think this is the most similar explanation. First, breathe in as hard as you can. Hold it in for about 3 seconds, and then breathe in again instead of exhaling. Repeat it over and over until you really feel like you're going to die. Is this how I'm going to die? I had some friends who think about death so easily, but when death got closer to me, it was really scary. As things turned out that my face was so swollen that I couldn't open my eyes. Even my mom didn't recognize me at first. Anyway, I lost my memory when I was in an accident. But when I woke up in a very short time, I was so scared thinking that I was going to die. I just peed on my pants, struggling with my feet, and finally passed out again. Some people ask me if I dreamed of a dream or if I noticed the time passed while I was unconscious. But my answer is no. When I regained consciousness, I was already in hospital. You know what's really scary? Everybody knows that I was unconscious for 3 weeks in the ICU. But in fact, my consciousness has been back since a week later. But nobody knew. Family, nurses, and even Doc. They didn't know at all. I couldn't move my eyelids or a finger at all. Though I was conscious, I was unable to move my body, only hearing sounds with my ears. At first, I really thought I was dead because my consciousness came back very slowly. Is it heaven or a dream? I thought so, but later I realized when I heard my mother's voice when she came to see me during visiting hours. Okay, I'm in the hospital now. I had an accident. It was just like a hell. I wanted to let them know that my consciousness had returned, but literally, there was no other way that I could do. The nurses stopped by my room 3 times a day. They opened my eyes and lit up my eyes with a flashlight to see the pupil reaction. I wanted to roll my eyes and let them know that I woke up, but stupidly, my eyes just looked at the light. Couldn't do anything. I didn't even know how the days went by. I had nothing to do all day, so I just went sleep and kept waking up or being lost in wild fancies every day, which was terribly boring. If I think it's been 3 or 4 days or so, it's only been a day. Well, visiting hours were normally twice in a day, so I could confirm that the day had passed by watching my parents come and go. After that, I began to worry about my physical condition. Are both my arms and legs attached well? Is my spine okay? Dang, I realized that I had signed to donate my organs after my death about a few years ago. What if my parents agreed to donate my body, although I'm alive? I felt like I was going to have a mental illness even after I completely woke up. Furthermore, I could feel the enormous pain in my body. The most painful thing was when they drilled a hole in my throat, and the doctor also said that there was a problem with the tube in my side, that I had to rearrange it. But I was judged by the doc that I was unconscious at that time. So everything proceeded without any anesthesia. But later on, when my consciousness was restored, I realized that the intensity of the pain at that time was less than a tenth of the actual pain. During the coma, it didn't hurt at all when they wrapped my wound. But later, I woke up. It felt like I was going to die. As you see, when you visit the ICU, you can see that the patient's condition is all clean. The nurses usually take care of everything before visiting hours in the morning. Literally, everything. That made me respect the nurses. One day, the nurses put something in a container and then injected it in my nose through the tubes. Actually, I wasn't hungry at all until then, but as soon as the food was injected into my nose, I suddenly felt hungry. I must not feel the taste because it was put in my nose, but actually, it was really delicious, and I could feel the way the food went down vividly. And that thing stops just below the chest, and it feels like something warm liquid is wrapping the area. I really love that feeling. But not long after, they sucked the food back with something like a syringe to see how much I had digested. I felt like my whole intestines were sucking up, and it really sucks. But once the food had been injected inside my body, I was excited whenever I heard the nurse shaking the can every time, because I wanted to eat it as soon as quickly. It's been about 2 weeks, and one day the doctor came in and said, "Let's wake me up." After some kind of drug was dosed, I thought I opened my eyes right after, but the doc said that I opened my eyes about an hour later. But nevertheless, the nurses were still all surprised, because no one usually wakes up in an hour. Of course, there wasn't much I could do after I opened my eyes. I was still put on a respirator and both my arms and legs were all tied up. I just kept my eyes open, moved a finger to right, talking a little bit. Just like that, I'd been given muscle relaxants for 3 weeks, and it seemed to have taken almost a month to walk again. Not only my arms and legs, but also my internal muscles were too relaxed. So it was the worst when I first went to the bathroom because I couldn't squeeze my butt at all. After a few weeks, I was able to leave the hospital. While lying down for a few weeks, I heard the nurses often gossiping about each other. So I just told my family about the fact that I was conscious. You don't want to embarrass each other, right? Well, whenever I lie on my bed before going to sleep, I keep thinking of that time. What if I can't breathe again while sleeping like this? Unfortunately, I can't sleep well since then, being scared of it. Imagine not being able to move a finger or your whole body at all, like my situation. You can't talk, and even you can't let the people know that you're awake. You know, hearing friends and family sob while you're lying down is much more miserable and just terrible than you thought. What most scary thing is that everyone doesn't know that you're conscious, but you are. Actually, this story isn't that great, but it's sure that this is something no one can experience easily. So I hope you guys are always careful and careful.
Hi, my pseudonym is Jade. I just wanted to share my experience that transpired 5 years ago. I was a busy college student back then. It was around 8 p.m. when I finished my classes. Shortly after our last subject ended, I am excited to go home to relax. When I find it hard to catch a ride, I decided to go to the jeepney terminal, which is a couple of meters away from our university, in order to secure a seat in the jeepney. Even though I was a bit exhausted from my schoolworks, I still managed to keep myself together and continued walking. It was just an ordinary busy evening, and as I am walking my way to the terminal, I always put my earphones on to listen to some music. As I approached the terminal, I heard the jeepney barker, a person who calls for passengers, said, "Oh, hulin biyahi na, hulin biyahi na ta," means that jeepney will be the last ride for tonight. I just laughed at the barker and told him that this would not be the last ride, but it will be the last one only for this day. Then I immediately climbed up to the jeepney. When the jeepney was already full with passengers, it then started to travel. While riding the jeepney, I am fond of looking outside while listening to music. I noticed that the view started to change. Instead of seeing city lights and buildings, it turned into a field, like we're on a rural place. The place was dark, and only the jeepney's light inside was the source of light on the road. I was confused for a moment because I thought I rode the wrong jeepney. But after I read the signage hanging inside the jeepney, I am indeed sure taking the right one. Maybe the driver took a wrong turn, or is this a kind of a shortcut? I said to myself. So I asked the driver if where he is taking us. "Excuse me, Manon, where are we?" The driver did not answer and just continued to drive. When I looked at my fellow passengers, I was shocked. They were all wearing white with some bloodstains, and their head were all missing. I could not believe my eyes. Then, out of the blue, the driver spoke. "We're not lost, miss. We are taking the right way." I was really terrified and shocked. The things can't sink in through my mind. Chills ran down through my spine. I was coldly sweating and my face turned pale. I wanted to jump out of the jeepney, but I can't move a muscle. Suddenly, I heard someone's voice out of nowhere. "You do not belong here. Go, just jump. Why are you here? You are not allowed in here." It snapped the creep out of me. Then I jumped out on the jeepney. I got scrapes on my arms and bruises on my legs as I fell on the succeeding jeepney. But I'm glad I managed to get out of it. As I stared at the jeepney that continued its journey, it suddenly crashed. The jeepney was badly damaged and blowed up. I was screaming